Chris Douglas here again. In my last video, I suggested how the American tax code since the 1950s had been influenced by a small group of the super rich for the benefit of the super rich. Just looking at the numbers, it's easy to see how the wealthiest of Americans have enjoyed decades of incremental tax cuts and therefore have amassed more and more wealth over time. But if that was the goal, did it really work? And what did it do to the American middle class along the way? In the 1950s, companies protected their earnings from taxation by using them in support of the public good. Increasing wages and benefits allowed the working class to enjoy the rewards of increasing productivity, while employee stock ownership programs allowed them to enjoy the rewards of capital ownership. The result of this was the bottom 90% of Americans owned an increasing share of the country's wealth through the decades leading into the 1980s. However, that trend flipped as the tax code was altered to favor the few over the many. Now we're facing an economy in which the top 0.1% and the bottom 90% own nearly equal shares of wealth. But it's not just about wealth. We can see over time a major change in how the wealthy spend their money or don't. In the 1950s into the 1970s, when the tax code began seriously to change, employee compensation maintained itself against corporate profit margins, and that makes sense. When wealthy employers faced a top tax rate of over 90%, they would rather invest their earnings in their people than lose them to the IRS. But by the late 80s, wages were on a sharp downturn, while corporate profit margins began to skyrocket. Since then, wages have been stagnant, employees are paid a fraction of what executives are pulling down, but companies are making more money, which they're plowing into share buybacks and mergers and acquisitions, neither of which contribute to our economic growth. And while the corporate share buybacks may have frozen in the wake of the coronavirus, they left some essential businesses, like airlines, in a cash-poor position to weather the quarantine. Because wages have stayed so stagnant, debt has become a necessity for Americans. And this has become only more obvious in COVID-19 America. Millions of American families entered this crisis with just $400 in savings. Though the Fed has reduced interest rates, and corporations and wealthy individuals are able to borrow cheaply, interest rates on credit cards are at an all-time high. Over the long term, total debt is continuing to rise for the poorest Americans, while it's trending down for those at the top. Increasing government and household debt benefits the mega-rich, because they're the ones that have the money to lend and get to earn interest on it. Wealth and income inequality has become a major political issue. We know the American dream is no longer within reach of the majority. Yet arguing about why is distracting us from actually fixing the issue. And the issue is, the mega-rich can only spend a fraction of all that money they're making because they've long since met their material needs. And there's no point in investing in the growth of business because 90% of American people don't have the increasing money to spend on what that business might supply. Yet still they collect more. And the overall effect is ever slower economic growth over the longer term, defying even repeated government stimulus. Of course, there are those who would suggest that other forces at work in our economy are responsible for this shift. In our next video, we'll take a look at some of the top tropes people commonly lean on to explain the shape of our modern American economy, and why they're wrong.